Moving on from historical context to close reading evidence. I want to talk to you for just a few minutes about induction and deduction in close reading, and then we'll look at some specific evidence from the play. So first, let's look down here at induction and deduction. So these are two different kinds of reasoning. Alright, according to Wikipedia, which you should never rely on unless you've decided you can, deductive reasoning comes from the top down, and it contrasts with inductive reasoning, which we can think of as bottom up, in the following way. In deductive reasoning, a conclusion is reached deductively by applying general rules that could hold over the entirety of a closed domain of discourse, narrowing the range under consideration until only the conclusion is left. So we start and we sort of know all the possibilities, and we sort of work down from a set of universal rules. In inductive reasoning, the conclusion is reached by generalizing or extrapolating from initial information, and as a result, induction can be used even in an open domain where there's epistemic uncertainty. So even if we don't know all the rules of, let's say, weather, we can make observations and day after day build up these observations, and eventually we might say, when clouds gather and when the humidity increases and when a few other things happen, we can bet that it's going to rain. So let's look at some examples of how this applies to reading. So this is a couple of examples of how deduction and induction works. So if we start over here from induction, on the deductive side, we start from a general principle or conclusion, right? So we would start with a principle like all men are mortal. That's something that we can say applies to this entire domain of humanity. And then we'd say Jack is a man, right? So there's our particular instance. And deduction would have us move in this direction to say, well, therefore Jack must be mortal. So we prove the cause by moving from general principles to the specific detail. On the other hand, we could also start from those observations of detail, like the sky is full of dark clouds and the humidity is rising, and we might conclude, oh yeah, it's going to rain soon. What does all this have to do with reading? Well, as a reader, you move back and forth between these different possibilities. So you might notice a few strange things happening at first on this side, right? As you're reading Death of a Salesman, maybe you notice there's a phrase that's getting repeated, like well-liked. So you say, wow, that's weird. Why is well-liked coming up so much? So that has you looking out for that idea of well-liked. Well, as you finish the play, you might look back at all those well-liked and figure out what was going on with Willie and what was happening there. Using that same example, we might move in the other direction and say, there seems to be this general kind of principle of repetition in this play. So let's try to figure out what those repetitions can tell us about a particular instance of one of those repeated elements. So maybe by thinking about how repetition works broadly through the play, we might figure out why Willie is so obsessed with being well-liked at some moment. So let's look at an example of something similar to that in this play. One thing that really stuck out to me, remember, the way to be a good close reader is to just keep your eyes and ears open as you're reading, and when you see something weird, you stop yourself and say, what is going on here? One of those weird moments in this play comes on page 1747 when Madame Pache appears. And the thing that jumped out at me is that we get this long stage direction, right, in the middle of 1747. We get this long discussion that says, the door at the back opens and Madame Pache takes a few steps downstage. She's a gross old harridan, wearing a ludicrous carroty-colored wig with a single red rose stuck in at one side, Spanish fashion. Garishly made up, in a vulgar but stylish red silk dress, holding an ostrich feather fan in one hand and a cigarette between two fingers in the other. At the sight of this apparition, the actors and the producer immediately jump off the stage with cries of fear, leaping down into the auditorium and up the aisles. The stepdaughter, however, runs across to Madame Pache and greets her respectively, as if she were the mistress. So, this raises a bunch of questions for me. This sticks in my craw, to use our phrase. Why does Madame Pache appear out of the mise-en-scène itself? It's almost like these props are what had to be thrown together to make her happen in this text. Why does the scene at Madame Pache's need to be repeated so many times? We have the stepdaughter mentions it several times, and the father is also talking about it, and finally the actors will put it on for us. And that might point us toward a bigger question, again, about repetition, right? Why is there all this repetition in the play? Why can't these characters just be done with their drama? So we can move in one direction first by sort of collecting the details here, right? Saying, we have a lot of mise-en-scène stuff going on. There's this stage direction that kind of takes over the play for a while, and then we might move toward a general principle. Or we might start from a general principle and say, wow, there's a weird repeated thing in this play of repetition that the players can't get out of what they're doing. And then we might move in the other direction and try to use that to help us figure out what more specific point the play is making.